to have that received and implemented and deployed in the real world?
That's correct. We're just at the end of a couple of projects
Mhm.
that we hope that will occur, but that's based on past experience where we did not do a good job of including stakeholders at the beginning.
Mm.
So we're trying to learn from that mistake. But you can think about how this has worked with in other contexts, like when you have simpler epidemiological models of the actual spread of the disease. So there were, as you know, there were lots of simulations run at the beginning of COVID-19, and policymakers were so desperate to have something to base their decisions on that they followed these. Unfortunately, some of the early ones did not have really cognitively complex agents at all, and they didn't even have human behavior included. It was more like an aerosol. If you spray aerosol in a population, how's it going to move through the population? Assuming that the people never moved or tried to avoid each other or anything. So it was quite a few models that really were not way overestimated the number of people who would get sick or die. So, but then there've also been really positive examples of social simulation working. So, if when you have a lot of time and the issue is something like how are we going to organize the traffic, or how are we going to should we make a bypass that goes this way, or that goes around the town this way, or should we put bike paths, should we invest in bike paths, will that lower heart rates, or should we put our investment somewhere else? When you have lots of time and policymakers are part of the process in in advance and along every step, and are helping you validate and calibrate the model, then at the end, it's much more likely they're going to find it helpful and trusted because they were part of the assumptions and the intermediate testing of the model, experimenting on the artificial agents as you go along in the process. So that's what we're hoping to
Yeah.
do with the Cambridge University folks.
What are the parallels between the things that you learn in simulation about, how to integrate forgiveness or how to de-radicalize? What are the parallels between the things that you learn in those simulations and the real world deployment of learnings from those simulations, which is both of which are kind of getting people as a group to accept a new idea? And welcome, Justin. I'll repeat my question so we're talking about forgiveness and conflict simulation, and we're talking about, I guess, if I can use I think the delta is the correct word to use, the delta between um, a concept being accepted by a population in a simulation and a concept about the simulation being accepted by real world humans.
Hmm.
So when you say the concept, Brian, do you mean to what extent? Let's just say reconciliation.
Hmm.
So in the artificial society, say we're successful with the team there at Cambridge, we're successful. We calibrate and validate a model, and in the artificial society, we run experiments, and it says in this simulation of these conditions, you get more people changing their attitude toward reconciliation and forgiveness. Right. So
Hmm.
that's in the artificial society, and then in the real world, how is that related to the real world? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because you're in the real world, you're trying to get people to change their attitude with how they make decisions. So in both cases, you're asking someone to change their attitude, simplistically speaking.
Hmm.
And so, how do you see the parallels between what you're learning and testing, and like as fundamentally getting people to change their mind, and how you're deploying those learnings in a manner that is also fundamentally getting people to change their mind or habits? And it looks like Sam has a question. If you want to defer to some
Sure.
additional reflection.
Sure.
Yeah, I reflecting a little on how we got here, being from the idea of presenting this research to policymakers. Um, Thinking about at least my layman's understanding of that world, every decision that they're making, there's always bias.
Hmm.
So when you're presenting your research, they're instantly thinking, what's your bias? What's your spin on all of this? And kind of where is the opportunity for that to kind of creep in? And Brian was talking about like showing your work. as a way of like, look, we're not really being biased here, but at the end of the day,
or here are our biases.
right,
Like in
exactly.
the code, you can look and say, and then people can argue and say, we think the assumptions should be different or the interaction rules should be different. Uh,
Yeah, that's kind of the fun of it, right? Is like when someone does challenge it and say, "Oh, you're being biased in this way, or are you being biased in this way?" Right? If they're accusing us of something, um, we can either, there's three options, right? One is like admit that they're correct and say, yes, we are biased in that way, and here's the code where that bias is programmed. We say, no, you're incorrect, and here's the code that logically falsifies your claim that we're being biased, right? That we are not being biased, and here's how. Or we say, look, we don't think so, but here's our code, you prove that we've been biased. And so either way, the biases are laid bare. Now, when policymakers, the funny thing about politicians is they're not that smart. And so when we go to them and we engage with them as stakeholders, we have, they can challenge and say, look, we think that, what about this bias, or these people think this, and we can say, look, in our model, here's how our model works. And the moment we say to them, look, here's how our model works, and if you have further questions, here's the code that you can look at, they just trust us. And it's very dangerous, right? Because while I believe that Laurent and I are very trustworthy people in this domain, it just goes to show how if someone wasn't trustworthy, or they had some nefarious end to try and prove some point, but they also had the ear of stakeholders, they could just program that bias in and lie about it, and the policymakers almost surely would have no idea that those biases were built in. I mean, you see it in economic models all the time. I mean, economic models used by the government, notice they're not open source.
yeah, very little.
It's
of
honestly,
is,
it is, I think, one of the biggest ethical issues of our current age, and no one is talking about this. But these economic models are being used by policymakers to make massive geopolitical decisions with our money. Right? They keep, oh, it's government money. Yeah, they got that from us. They took it from us, and we can't do a damn thing about it, right? Like, they took it from us, and that's the end all and be all of that. Once they have that money, they do all of these things, and they say, oh, it's for your own good. And it's like, okay, well, how do you know that? And if they're, a better politician than others, they'll say, oh, this economic model suggests that, it'll help us curb inflation. It's like, okay, let's see the model.
Yeah,
And
how do
they
you
never
define
show the
my own
model.
good?
Yeah, why it is that any government policy is made with anything except for open source analyses and code is something that I find not only like logically mind-blowing, I find it morally reprehensible.
Yeah, it is problematic.
And everybody's doing it. I don't know a single government that says, yeah, our code is open source for like our economic models.
Economic models, no. There are some models that are, but
What does the simulation data say about how you can forgive the government for doing that?
well, we haven't even started working on this model yet. But Brian, let
But
me.
it is based on an earlier model where we have some interesting results.
Yeah.
Because in trying to model conflict, we accidentally modeled peace.
Yeah, the Dove model, right? What did we call the
I still call it Agent Zeno.
Agent Zeno? Yes, that's
I
right.
still like
what
Agent
sci-fi
Zeno.
reference is that?
It's a mixture of Xeno as in xenophobia and Agent Zero, which is something that people thought was like this revolutionary new like approach to modeling social systems, published by Joshua Epstein. I guess this was several years back, and he like wrote this book that everyone like lost it over. They were like, this is great, this is so interesting, but the whole simulation system had 3 agents. And I was like, well, 3, that's not even a crowd, basically. Like, that might be a crowd. It's definitely not a party. It's surely not a religious movement. And so myself and well, our friend and colleague Saiku Diallo, who now works with DARPA, basically said, yeah, people are saying that you can't do it with more than 3 agents, that like the math won't work out. And I was like, there's no reason why this math won't work out. It definitely does. It's just a matter of figuring out how to actually program a system that can do that. And he was like, yeah, people are saying that we can't do it with the systems that we have. And so I was like, I will deliver you a fully scalable in not only population size, but different network constructions so that you can create any number of people with any conceivable or mathematically possible social network, and it will still run. And I'll do it by Thanksgiving. And I
And
sent
he
it to
did.
him the
He did.
morning of Thanksgiving that year,
Yes.
and he bought me a bottle of whiskey for it.
Yes.
And so that actually is the basis for our Agent Zeno architecture, like the basis of that. And then we build these other cognitive aspects onto it. One of the things that's interesting, and my theory is that this is going to play a really interesting role because it played an outsized effect, or it played a significant effect on why religious violence started to tone down during a conflict. And I have a feeling it's going to have something similar to do with this in like a peace and forgiveness situation. Actually had to do with the role of forgetting in our model.
What do you mean
So
by
this
that?
is, well, it raises a question, at least in our simulation, that is very simple, but from a practical standpoint is kind of interesting, I think, and kind of critical, I think, to discuss very early on in our project. Which is, tangibly speaking, when it comes to peace and reconciliation, what is the difference between forgiving and forgetting? What's the relationship, right? Because there's obviously a little bit of overlap. Because I think, like, cognitively, right, if you say you forgive someone but you never really forget what they did, there's always going to be these implicit biases, right? But if you have the ability to actually forget what is done, then those implicit biases can also start to go away. And so I think that, like, one of the key things to to policy forgiveness is going to be both forgiveness and forgetting. People need to kind of, I mean, and it's almost impossible, but to the extent that they can, I think they need to forget the wrongdoings that were done, at least on a day-to-day basis, right? They can't forget it in a historical context, but one of the issues that happens in a lot of ethnic and religious violence, right, is that people take violence that wasn't done to them and they internalize it as if it were done to them, and they respond in kind. And I think, that's a historical violence that they need to be mindful of, right? And that they can't really escape because it's part of a history. But when people internalize something that was done to someone else as if it was done to them, that's also really unhealthy and can lead to things like depression, and learned helplessness, for example, and a number of other, like, negative, clinical and psychological phenomena that really are best to be avoided.
Hmm. Do you? I mean, it feels. I feel called to kind of make a language shift. Um, as you talk about forgetting, but what I hear is like an opportunity to choose a different story. So if forgetting is like you're trying to, don't think of a purple elephant. It's like you can't not. Um,
Exactly.
but if you say, like a purple elephant's gonna stomp on my face versus like purple elephants are strong and loving, like it's reframing rather than forgetting. We do have a question that came in that I'm just reading now. Any advice for a dude who is 37, feels behind in life, and has a tough time getting out of bed and taking action? So feels to be a question that is pointing at the microcosm of the macrocosm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a hard place to start from every morning, right? I mean,
Forgive yourself.
yeah, I mean, that's part of it, right? Is the key to motivation is that it's internal, right? No one's going to be able to motivate you from the outside. It's about finding what it is, you know that what it is that fuels you, right?
Hmm.
What is it that keeps you going? But that's a realization that doesn't just happen overnight, right? And for a lot of people, that I know that are friends of mine, right? Like, I'm going to be 35 this year. A lot of my friends are, in this age range as well. And some of them are, struggling because they never really found their footing and their direction earlier in life, and they feel like they missed out. And it's like, one of the things that, I actually told a guy, the other night at dinner. He was asking me, my opinion on, where he might go for graduate school and stuff. And I was telling him, like, don't forget the average age for PhDs are like 40 years old, right? Like, just because you're not, you know, a boy genius, just because you're not Elon Musk doesn't mean that it hasn't happened, right? What is it? Most billionaires make their first million at 40.
Hmm.
So, like, at 37, things are just getting started, and that's one thing I would kind of keep in mind. I mean, I've definitely had sort of a quick shift from what I thought I would be doing at 40 in the last few years, where, if I'm on this trajectory, I will not be doing what I thought I was going to be doing. And I think it's great. Like, it gets me going. But in lieu of that, right, before one can have that realization of what it is, right? Because, it's not just going to smack you like Newton's apple over the head. I think one of the best things that you can do is have a routine and ritualize as much of your life as possible. Get up at the same time every day, even if you don't want to. It's going to be, it sucks, particularly if you don't have anything like that you have to be up at. But get up. Don't get up after 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. After 9 a.m., you're wasting the day. Like, I try and get up at like 6 or 6:30 every day. Um, and I know Laurent gets up even earlier than I do, but I think, getting up early, making sure you have some sort of routine, making exercise part of that routine, particularly early in the day, right? Get out and go for a walk, like, clear your mind. The other thing is uh, either turn off your cell phone or set it so that you get alerts only during certain times of the day. Because one of the things that had a very negative impact on me, particularly in my early 30s, and in my late 20s, was that my phone was constantly going off, and I had these devices, and it was always emails of people either needing something from me or hassling, or there was social media and just all the bullshit that comes with social media. And the fact is that nobody on social media cares. You don't need that in your life, and it's just bringing you down. So, like, make a space for that, like you make a space for yourself, like you make a space for exercise, like you make a space for things like food. And don't just eat because, like, you're like, oh, I should eat, so I'm going to order a pizza. Like, eat deliberately. And the more you can do things deliberately and almost ritualistically, I think the more you start to enjoy them for what they are, right? When you can reflect on what you're doing, you don't just feel like you're the passive observer in your own life, right? Like, if it's your life, dude, you need to be the main character. You can take it up. It doesn't mean that your story is Elon Musk's story, but definitely be the main character. And part of that is, like, shape your story. And if your story doesn't have any shape yet, you build that foundation, right? You start every day, make sure you wake up on time, make sure you make that coffee, you eat that breakfast, like, make your own breakfast. Don't order too much food, like delivery sort of a thing. Those sorts of things, like, it's like working with your hands and doing something for yourself. You can have a sense of achievement that starts, and it's very small, but eventually it builds into something larger, I think.
Yeah.
That's
I'd like
that's my only thoughts.
Yeah,
I'd
good
like to
advice.
take the
Yeah, good
conversation
thoughts.
back to
I
forgiveness
have
and
experienced
forgetting.
similar. Also, there's a lot of gratitude amidst that for the answers provided. Um, it is interesting how what shirt am I wearing today? Yay, relevant T-shirt. I'm wearing my as above so below T-shirt uh, because it as you can forgive yourself and change your own patterns, right? So too can societies learn to change those stories.
Mm.
Trying to think of a relevant sci-fi, but uh, being able to
Dune,
create create a new narrative as a
right? Dune.
society.
Have you seen Dune?
I haven't
You're,
yet.
you're
I
looking for a
have,
sci-fi narrative.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
Go on,
interesting that you
go on.
mentioned reframe the narrative, by the way, because just to kind of, like, one of the things that brings to mind for me is that within within the way that these AI systems work, um, learning is not just done like a list, right? So when you learn something about the outgroup that wronged you, they wronged you in a specific context. And our AI systems, to a point, have that, they are embedded in a psychological context of their own, right? There are certain beliefs that were, the key part of an argument between them and an outgroup member, for example. So one of the things you can do is, one is you can forget, right? You can kind of, forget that belief that has that emotionally charged aspect. But the other thing that you can do, though, is you can mathematically, at least the way the AI works, right, is you shift the weights of the beliefs that surround that core belief, which is the mathematical sort of representation, so to speak, of shifting the narrative, right? So one of the things that I really want to try and do, and play with this project is exactly that, because I don't think forgetting is necessarily, even though it might be mathematically the most efficient way of doing this, I don't think that forgetting is really viable for a lot of reasons. One of which being, um, you know, the social media exists and the internet doesn't forget. So any conflict that
Mm.
exists today is going to be easily brought back up,
Yeah,
and
just
probably will
churns it
regularly
right
be
back
brought
up.
back up. Yeah. So
Sure.
what's going to need to be done is we're going to need to reframe our narratives in a way where it's like, yeah, this happened, and here's, we have to understand these are, particularly with the three conflicts that we're working on with Cambridge University, right? These are, they call them post-conflict societies, but I don't think that that's really a good word for it, because in Northern Ireland the conflict is still a real aspect of people's daily lives and the way that they act. And even if there isn't a bomb that goes off in Derry or in Belfast, it doesn't mean that the history of the conflict and their experiences in the conflict aren't real, or that people avoid certain neighborhoods because they know crossing into those neighborhoods could be dangerous for them. The same in Sudan, and the same also in the Balkans. I mean, the former Yugoslavia is a much more peaceful place now. It's basically just a giant tourist destination. Um, but there are parts of it that are still kind of rough, and there's still a lot of like animosity between the different groups there. And so I think that it's one of those things that, reframing that narrative of like who I am and how do I relate to this, horrible aspect of history, without forgetting that it is part of who I am, is something that I think is one of those things that's, if we can figure out how to do that in a useful way, I think that's going to have the most policy implication. Because just going in and like going to Belfast and being like, well, the key is, guys, you guys just got to kind of forget that that whole thing ever happened. That's a really dumb suggestion to make to a policymaker.
Indeed, indeed.
So this is one of those things, right, where we can constrain this model so that it doesn't give us that mathematical answer. And that's one of the keys to how we're going to validate and test this model, is we're going to say, look, we know that the math will work out to give us this answer, but we know that that's not policy relevant. So let's constrain this AI into systems that are really only, we'll say, optimistically plausible, because there's certain things that I think we should explore that are not politically plausible as they are, but they might be such a good idea once we could show them that politicians could be convinced to pursue it.
Hmm.
Or even creatively open up new ideas that they had never thought of before, because you can explore so many counterfactual options.
Exactly.
Can y'all hear
Can
And
you
and
can you
can y'all
explain
hear
to
my
William in
audio?
counterfactual options?
things that are have were not the case and might not be the case,
Or
Hmm.
but
have not yet been the case.
have not yet
To
been the
quote
case.
Galadriel in Lord of the Rings, things that have not yet come to pass. It's very
I
much a Galadriel. So, like, I actually really like this. Laurent, we should use this for a paper
Mic.
title. So, anyone listening, we call dibs.
Okay.
We should write a paper called Galadriel's Mirror. Because
Ooh.
Galadriel's Mirror in Lord of the Rings, right? It shows you things that, things, what is it? Things that are
Right.
true, things that are false, things that you want to see, things that you might not want to see. And it can show you things in the past, things in the present, and things that have not
I
yet
gotta
come to
check my
pass.
mic.
Yes, I'm in. I'm totally in.
Hmm.
And
The
simulation is very much a Galadriel's Mirror.
Yes, yes.
hmm. The thing that's coming to me is a lot of, so trying to imagine all different individuals in
Check.
two different societies who have a shared trauma, right? Like one attacked the other. Foundation. Foundation was actually the sci-fi show that I was thinking of, where this plays out, where you have a an authoritarian entity that takes action against two, makes an accusation, and then I'm trying to not spoil it, but basically they are prompted to forgive each other for what they did to each other over generations, because
Hmm.
what they did was the product of fundamentally
Yeah, I
gaslighting.
gotta check this mic.
And so, they're like, we have to forgive that we have
Check.
killed so many of each other, so that we can unite against the
Mm.
common enemy that we never saw before. And for me, what I hear is like, is process, right? Because if you try and attempt that, every individual in those societies is going to experience that at a different pace.
Mm.
Younger individuals will be able to transition through that, perceivably faster than older who have more trauma or more significant trauma. Similar to, some people experienced pandemic more strongly than others. We know of many people who like had just started a business, or we're like kind of on the cusp of something and got, hammered particularly difficult or particularly hard. So, I think that having a shared language of process of like where someone is, you're like, oh, like I'm still in the insert stage, right? Like, which is similar
Hmm.
to AA, I would say. You have that framework for communicating where you're at very quickly and very succinctly. um, have you seen any implementation of systems like that, like implementation of a shared system for collective communication and like very complex processes in terms of where someone is at emotionally
Can y'all hear me now?
on a societal level?
Y'all can't
Not
hear
that
me,
I can
huh?
think of.
No, do you mean a simulation or more philosophical discussion of those issues?
Implementation of learnings within the simulation, through
Yeah, yeah. It's
cult,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is related to the question you were discussing earlier, Brian, which is really, I mean, it's absolutely the key one, right? What is the relationship between the attitudes and behaviors in the simulation and the attitudes and behaviors in the real world? And Justin, before you came, I was telling him how in our many of our most of our other earlier projects, we did not bring in stakeholders and change agents
Hmm.
early enough, and so it didn't work so well with the emotional contagion COVID one. We're trying to, and we should have that model soon. But but really, Brian, it's like the kind of models that we're doing, the level of cognitive realism and the social networks complexity and the validation to real world data. This level of social simulation is really relatively new, even scientific, relatively even scientifically. So even though there are several teams
I
around
have
the
to
world
reload this
trying
page.
to develop stakeholder participatory.
Hopefully, if I reload the page, I can get my audio working. I've got something to say, and I want to share your question. I'm sure you've already left, Tiger Young, but I wanted to share your question. I thought they were ignoring me. They couldn't hear me. I'm just a girl in a mansplaining world. I'm just a girl in a mansplaining world. Y'all can hear me, yeah? I see my audio, my levels going on for the stream, so I know y'all can hear me. Fucking amen. Hey, this software needs to get over itself. It always changes the perspective of my camera whenever I load. Which means it's gonna be fucked up if I go to the other side.
Regions who have spent lots of time on the ground, who are trying to mediate forgiveness and reconciliation, who know the history, and their understanding of the individuals and the groups will be
Mm.
fed into the model. So that's one direction. And then once the model is running and producing outputs that make sense, and can actually, you might say, simulate the past, and then we run it forward in the future, then those same experts will say, all right, we buy this simulation in the future because we've seen you're able to simulate the past. And then they will know way better than me or Justin how, which psychological mechanisms or which social or economic or political or narrative conditions are most likely to actually lead to the real world outcomes that the simulations are suggesting. So it's an art. It's an
Mm.
art as well as a science.
Hmm. So to return to our analogy, Laron and I are the beautiful 5,000-year-old lady elf queens
Oh, I
that
like it.
bring the
I am
stake-holding
All
hobbits to
shall love
100%
me
Galadriel.
calling
and
you.
despair.
I am 100% calling you Lady Elf Queen from now on, here henceforth.
Yes.
Chantal, with zero
That
context,
makes
is just like, what is going on in this session?
Laron is the doctor's lady elf queen.
The doctor's Lady Elf Queen.
I love it. I love it.
But and then of course we have all of our little Frodos
Isn't it
around
the
the
doctor's
mirror.
Lady's Elf Queen?
Queens.
Ooh, maybe.
Queens.
Can
Yeah,
y'all hear
alright,
me
that's
now?
it. I'm just calling Laron Queens
Yeah,
from now
I can
on.
hear you now.
You can hear me now? Okay, yeah, I've been trying to talk
Yes,
forever. I had to
Queen.
reload.
Oh,
Talking
no.
about forgiveness and forgetting, and then
Mhm.
also reframing the narrative. I think it's really important to make sure that that's done authentically. Like, you're not just artificially, rephrasing the narrative to make people forget or make people think that something happened a certain way. But I was going to mention the success that's been found in criminal justice over the past 20 or so years with restorative justice systems that have been implemented where, and this is all coming from indigenous knowledge, the whole talking circle with the talking stick and everybody gets their chance to speak their mind, which is very similar to the question you had, Brian, about have there been mass systems of communication where people can relate with each other and share their perspectives and kind of evolve their understanding of the situation. It's not that they change the situation, they just understand multiple perspectives to understand the context of how something happened so that they can move forward in their lives, kind of rebuilding those fragilities that they have. Because ultimately, conflict is all based on fragilities from everybody, of like not trusting each other based upon past traumas. So in restorative justice, they bring all the stakeholders together. And in this case, it's for criminal justice. So they bring the offender, the victim, maybe victim's family members, and maybe other stakeholders involved to share their experience. And it seems like a very simplistic thing to do, but the statistics are like overwhelming of not only the criminal not reoffending, which is a problem that they see with like prison not being effective at all. If anything, it just perpetuates the problems. And then also that the stakeholders don't have to live the rest of their life in fear, and a lot of those fragilities have been shaken away. So, I think that there has been proven models, and there is a lot of indigenous knowledge around forgiveness, and it's not really forgiveness that you're seeking, because what the heck does like "I forgive you" really mean? Other than what's more powerful is I understand why you did it, and then the person that did the offense can understand why they did it and how they hurt someone else, so that they can move forward and make better decisions in life and be more civilized. Yeah, have you heard of? I've brought this up before, but Justin or Laurent, have y'all heard of these types of practices? And there we go. Everybody disappeared. Ah. All right, let me. My whole site crashed. I crashed again. Oh my goodness. I got my question, and then I got kicked out. Let me go back in. And that's it. When you get mansplained so much that you get kicked off the platform. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Might as well drink some tea. Let's go. Let's go. We got a fire noise back. It's taking forever to load this page. Dang. I just rebooted my whole system too.
Oh, did you? I can hear you now, so
Great.
You're back in.
Thanks. Sorry, y'all.
Yeah, we're still talking about your topic.
Yeah, we're still talking about your topic actually, because
Awesome.
I was bringing up how in the West, most of the justice system is really, the state, and it's the idea of like you defend yourself against the state instead of defending yourself against the person that you harmed. Whereas in Papua New Guinea, the elders force you to defend yourself against the family and friends of the people that you harmed. And what's interesting is that you don't have a lot of recidivism, but of course you also don't have that in a very small scale society. I think one of the things, a lot of times they say, oh well, the modern justice system we have to have it this way because it's more efficient, and I don't think that's true at all. I think what we've done is we've forced centralization of power into a hierarchy that doesn't need to be either centralized or hierarchical, but that you could have that restorative justice is a brilliant solution in in its most abstract form, even because it is decentralized, because it only focuses on the parties that are involved. You don't need a third party, right? It's kind of like, the opposite of the joke about marriage is, I love you so much I'm going to get the government involved. It's like it's like
I
the
forgot I
opposite
heard
of that
that.
is like, yeah, the opposite of it is like, I hate you so much I'm going to get the government involved. It's like, what's the government got to do with this? Like, they're
Yeah.
probably not going to help. So the idea of having a restorative justice system that's decentralized and community based, right? Because how many, like, if you commit a felony, right, it becomes the problem and financial burden of everyone in America. And if you commit most misdemeanors, right, you're tried at the state level. If you're in LA, who in, the Redwoods gives a crap about your speeding ticket? Why is there, or who gives a crap that you broke into somebody's house? There shouldn't be, as many resources, man. I know that, a lot of the justice system does get centralized in the police forces and things like that, but I think we need to think more generally about how, like, what's the function of the court? Is the court functioning as intended, or is the court really just another administrative loophole for you to jump through if you get out of line? And it really seems that that's what it is, which is why over 90% of all cases in the United States right now are settled through plea bargaining, which basically means you plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit so that nobody has to try you, which means that justice is not being solved restoratively, right, to the people you actually harmed, but even in principle, justice is not even being served to the state that is saying that they're in charge of, doling out the justice, because you didn't plead guilty to the crime you were charged with. You pleaded guilty to a lesser crime so that they don't have to deal with you. And that suggests that they have neither the moral authority or the logistical ability to deal with something that restorative justice could just deal with so much more efficiently in local communities.
And this is so directly related to the general theme of our conversations, safe sex, SECTS,
Mm-hmm.
because we evolved in the kind of small scale society that Justin was just describing, but we now live in massive, complex, literate, pluralistic societies with hierarchical structures and classes and so forth, and so how to take the value of restorative justice of that kind, but in a way that could be scalable, if I can use that term, because it works in a small scale society. But once you get to a certain level of energy capture and governmental complexity and economic complexity, it no one's figured out yet. I don't think how to do that, even theoretically, much less practically. But we're working on it, right, Justin?
We're getting there, man. We're getting there. And I think that also, like, Elise raised another point, right, about sort of like the importance of authenticity, which is kind of a hard word to address when it comes to, like, quantifying things, just because it's a complex thing generally, right? So it's difficult in that regard. But when it comes to coming up with like an authentic way of reframing a narrative, that's one of the other reasons why it's really useful to take the stakeholder sort of first approach that Laurent and I do when we're doing this, right? Because when we engage the local communities, we're doing so in ways where we have varying knowledge about those communities from a firsthand perspective. So, for example, we're working in three communities. I have, spent some time in the former Yugoslav region. We work very closely. I mean, part of our team is Croatian. So I've got some experience there. Um, and in Northern Ireland, I lived there for couple years, and studied the conflict there specifically. Have a master's degree from the university that kind of leads the study of conflict resolution in that area. So on that one, I think I have a little bit more like on the ground understanding. But we're also working in Sudan and South Sudan, and I know very little except for what I've read in The Economist about Sudan and South Sudan.
Mm.
And so you know, understanding the cross-cultural psychology is one thing, right? You can get that from, papers and understand that in theory. But then when it comes to this is what will work or will not work on the ground for our communities, that's why we have to have people that aren't Laurent and I. And we have to engage directly with stakeholders that are
and
in those communities and
and we're
potential change agents, as they
yeah.
say, right? The people who can actually enact this and tell us, yes, this will work. I can do this, or we can do that. Because otherwise, we're spinning our
Yeah,
wheels.
and
Otherwise, it's just
and
another academic paper.
yeah, exactly. And some of them, I think, are doing the sort of thing that Elise was talking about, on the ground, actually working with people to get them to change their narratives, talk to each other,
Yeah.
and hear stories and so forth.
Yeah, so we've approached actually some people who aren't just like the local community leaders either. Particularly in the case of the Balkans, we are discussing having people who were directly involved in the religious communities at a very high level actually on our advisory board. Um, one of the British representatives who helped do the peace negotiations in Northern Ireland, we've approached to be on the advisory board, and has worked with sort of some of our colleagues in the past. So like we have pretty good understanding there. One of the people who's gonna kind of be part of our party here as well has done extensive work with the Department of Veterans Affairs in the former Yugoslav region, and has done a lot of research into like reconciliation and reintegration of soldiers after the Civil War. So we're slowly but surely getting more and more people. One guy who's on our advisory board actually is a British knight, who has done a lot of work into try and take scientific understandings of religion in order to build peace and harmony throughout the world. So it's actually it's going to be interesting to see, for the people who are there on that advisory board, how much can they bring, and if not, can we just use their social capital of being a British knight, for example, to shoot well above our own weight in order to get to the stakeholders that we need on the ground, in
Mm.
order to be like, look, South Sudan, you guys are complex. We don't want to screw this up. We need your help. How can we work together with stakeholders there in order to make this as good as it can be, and then try and throw some fancy names
Yeah,
around to
we
kind
have
of
to we have to
excite them.
invite Kitty. We have to invite Kitty to be part of this. Maybe in the
So
not
it's funny. I actually
so much.
I sent her a message to see if she wanted to drop in, but she's busy tonight.
Mm. Well, we're coming up on our hour, and this has been enthralling and also motivating in a way I feel like a few previous chats haven't been. Is getting to the point where we're really just the conversations that we're having. It's about what's happening in the research, right, in the testing, but then also how to use that same understanding to translate those learnings into the real world. And yeah, I think there's a large contingency of people, as Elise mentioned, and Sam also has background with, who are using indigenous wisdoms to facilitate these types of things without the science. So what's really interesting is where's the bridge between, right? Where do the science and the spirituality meet? Because we have this world that I watched a TED talk yesterday. Actually, it's still in my tabs, talking about was it Kate Raworth, talking about a healthy economy.
Donut
And
economics.
my favorite bit from it was today we have economies that need to grow whether or not they make us thrive. What we need are economies that make us thrive whether or not they grow. And I think
I love it.
bridging the gap between the science and the spirituality to both show up and kind of communicate in the languages that exist today, which unfortunately are growth for the sake of growth, to then bring people together and say, hey, let's forgive and forget and heal and whatever those frames are that get people
Yeah.
there. So super grateful for
Yeah.
this and excited for next week, and also excited to welcome more people into this space to to ask great
Yeah.
questions. Thank you, Sam and
Next
Elise, also
next week
for
we'll have our
jumping.
friend Pavel Koznach join us.
Oh,
So
good.
we'll have two guys from Bratislava.
Yes.
One
Excellent.
actual Slovak and me.
Looking forward to
But
it.
yeah,
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. As
as am I.
always. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Let me
guys.
Thanks, y'all.
close out this stream.
Hey, Justin, I have one last question before you run.
Yeah.
Really quick. Because you talked about that there might be like you need to forget sometimes, right?
Yeah.
But if data practices and like the whole point of like blockchain is you can't delete anything. There is no forgetting.
Maybe there should be.
Well, the question is when you hit the archive button, so that
Yeah,
it's just
I
no
mean,
longer in the inbox.
yeah, I mean, well, within the blockchain itself, I mean, that's kind of like within the context of like cryptocurrencies themselves. I think that's actually really interesting. In some cases, I think that it shouldn't. You don't necessarily need to implement forgetting, but I think in the cases of like financial transactions, that actually it's a matter of data security that it should be forgotten. I think that's one of the critical issues with Bitcoin is that there should be like a forgetfulness of like, look, after X number of months or years, like this just fades out because it's no longer important. Like that transaction, um, it's almost like tracing through the chain. Like what's the path that the coin takes? And I think to an extent you can kind of say like, look, okay, look, if this guy has, lost all of, he's no longer out, he's zeroed out his account sort of a thing and gave it to all of these other people, you don't necessarily need to keep all of that other guy's past transactions, right? That guy's zeroed out. So all of the data and all of the information that's being stored in the block in the block for those previous transactions, what's their function?
Historical records, I guess, but
Yeah.
what ability should
That's
those
one of those
records
things that
have
makes you
to
think like,
affect the present?
yeah, could you have like a master chain record, right? Where it actually stores everything, everything, everything,
Yeah.
whereas what's distributed onto the blockchain itself is only the things that are the most relevant to actual like live finance in the moment.
Right, but then you're not forgetting.
Yeah, then you're not, well, you're selectively forgetting.
Well,
You're choosing
again,
what needs to be remembered.
is forgetting important, or can we reframe, right? Like
Mm.
this, this happened to us versus this happened for us. Because like if, as Sam mentioned, and kind of speaking to this bridge between science and spirituality, if the existing world is all about like, we have an immutable record, on the blockchain side, or here's my timeline on the Facebook side. If the ability to forget is currently very difficult, and the EU is taking this brute force approach of like the right to forget, and that's not
Yeah.
working, then can we reframe and create a standardized process around that so that it's like, hey, that thing really did happen. We're not expecting
Hmm.
everyone collectively to just erase it from their memory, but like we
Yeah.
are choosing a different story together.
Yeah. And this is one of those things where I think like the more decentralized this is, the more efficient and more likely it is that we will arrive at the most harmonious and valuable answer. Because like when it comes to things like the right to be forgotten, for example, that's something that's highly decentralized, right? Every single person has that right, but you have to exercise that right, which is the funny thing about European rights as opposed to like the American concept of rights, right? Is American concepts of rights, you have them. You don't have to do anything, you just have them. Whereas in the European concept of rights, it's something that you are permitted to do at will, but it's something that very much is like you have to do it in order to have that. So in a way, the European legal system is more set up towards privileges, not necessarily the idea of a natural right. There are very few natural rights in the European system, and many of them are contingent upon other aspects of the system. So, like the right to be forgotten, for example, is only as useful as your right to know that someone has your data, which you don't necessarily have in the European Union. Right? How much of the data is just archived, is just kind of sitting around that people have from God only knows when, and you can't exercise your right to be forgotten unless you go to that person. If it was truly a right to be forgotten, they would institute something that says, look, unless you engage with this person every X months, you have to delete their data. Right? There should be like a trailing data loss of engagement. And I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing to implement generally. I think that would be a great way to deal with data ethics. So for example, Google Chrome, right, which is like totally shit browser. People
how
have
you really feel.
Yeah, right, exactly. So Google Chrome, right, has had issues where your passwords will get hacked or whatever. And if your passwords get leaked off of like the Google Chrome text files where it keeps all of your credit card information, because security. Like when someone gets a hold of all of that, you can have you can get alerted to it, right? Like they're supposed to tell you. And then you get these emails from places you're like, wait, I haven't had an account there for 10 years. Like, how is this even happening still? Like, how is that even a thing? Why did they not delete that account? And so you have to, you can kind of think like, well, if we had like a trailing forgetfulness, like a data trailing deletion function, then that would actually be a really interesting way of dealing with it. It would also be a really interesting way of dealing with the fact that data storage is becoming such an energy intensive, like, part of the global story of energy consumption. Generally speaking, it's all fine. There's nothing really happening, relative to the coal and oil industries. Data centers are nothing, but they're growing every day. And in the next 10 or 20 years, they're going to be a pretty sizable chunk of our energy consumption is just going to be storing data. So if we can get rid of some of that data, particularly from like large social media companies, which are a massive amount of the data that's being stored, just because everyone feels the need to talk about everything that they eat for dinner, and every time they fart upwind they need to throw a tweet in the air about it. So it's like, if that's happening, like there's data that's still there, like, but meanwhile, like a lot of data that would be great to analyze they don't even let us have. I would love to see the data from like the Donald subreddit, for example. There's a lot we could learn from studying that subreddit, but that's not there. But meanwhile, all of the Kardashians are still on social media.
It's making me think of an app where because I just signed up for this thing yesterday where it's like you change your billing profile for your energy, and so basically I signed up for this thing so that we gave them our credit card, and then when we pay our gas bill, they pay our gas bill and bill us. And the way that they do it is that it's basically through these relationships that allow them to source clean energy. And so by you basically like consent to this outside thing, and then they manage the relationship and pressure the utility company to use clean energy. And my thought is like, you get like same with like a belief driven credit card point. It says like, this is how much carbon you have saved or captured from your purchases because we donate this much to those things. I'm just thinking of an app where like it's a social app where you like tweet something or post something and you say like, I want this to be forgotten, and it just like literally gets deleted. Like it doesn't go anywhere, it just gets deleted, and then it says you've saved this much carbon on like the data storage of that tweet that
That'd be
would have
funny.
existed.
What was
which
that?
doesn't.
Wasn't there an app that did that? What was it? Snapchat?
Yeah, but Snap, I mean, they did it with of like, it gets forgotten. I'm specifically thinking of like if you had a ticker of like how much
That could track it.
yeah, so that you could track like, okay, well forgot tweeted that thing a year ago, so you've been earning points on like, and you basically just track like how many characters would have been created and then stored on the server somewhere, and how much energy that would take over time.
The Twitter API allows you to delete tweets programmatically, actually. So you could, in theory, go through and find tweets before date X and have them deleted.
That
so you
would
could
be
do that
amazing to like do
with the Twitter, like Twitter REST API could do that. You could just like troll through it at night when everyone's asleep and just like delete everything, and then just record how many characters are deleted and have some sort of metric of like each character is X kilowatt hours of storage on the data server.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, dude,
Just
you could
basically like go and delete your old tweets to save the planet.
Also, dude, think about how great that would be for everyone in the world. Like, you remember that dumb shit you said like 10 years ago, Brian?
Yep.
the stuff that
I
I remember
never
because
would
I
have
was there
expected
with the
Brian to say
internet.
something.
Like, think about it, right? Like there's so many things that are on the internet. Like Kevin Hart like tweeted some like insensitive thing like a decade ago, and he lost hosting the Oscars for it. And he was like, "Man, that wasn't even me. I was just playing. It was stupid or whatever." But like, the internet is unforgiving. But like, they just drag up this stuff of like, like nobody's going to be president in 10 years, right? Because like everyone's got something on social media that makes them look bad. Like people are just completely unelectable. I mean, that's why we have a Trump, right? It's just like we've set the bar at social media. So we got social media. Like, democracy gives you what you deserve, not what you want. And so like, that's basically what happened. That's what we got. And so I think it's interesting to think like if we just auto did that with all of the social media apps, you could just like you'd basically have like your social media presence would be who you basically are now, not who you were 10 years ago. And that I think would be really useful, right? Because a lot of people just aren't forgetting enough of like what happened in the past, and they're kind of still living in the past because they're like, yeah, well, Facebook reminded me that 8 years ago I posted this thing, and it's like, dude, that don't matter. Don't be dumb.
I've got like a really pessimistic bunch in my Reddit audience today. Someone said the right to be forgotten is an idealistic pipe dream. The intelligence community nor corporations don't give a shit about your privacy, and it is anti-ethical to the whole idea and in the use of Web 3.0. Anyway, I mean, yeah, who's to say that even if we do go through and try to scrape all of our history that someone else hasn't already archived it for us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely a possibility.
Does intelligence
No doubt.
agencies do that? Do they like create their own archives?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what use is it?
I mean,
trying
so like,
to delete ourselves?
so like I agree with him. I agree with him on the first part. On the second part, I don't know that the right to be forgotten is in some way antithetical to Web 3.0. I don't see why you can't be forgotten on Web 3.0.
Well, I think that's what Web 3.0 is going to do. It's going to reform our relationship with social media, and I'm seeing that through the live streaming, right? Because I'm doing a lot of this live streaming like hours now, hours and hours and hours. None of it gets recorded. It's all in that moment. So the people that I'm engaging with, the brand that I'm building, the community I'm building, it's all in that moment, like what you just said. And what it's allowed me to do is kind of cool off the rest of my social media. Like the permastamp social media is like highly curated, it's very limited, and like the rest of my personality and the rest of my ideas really are just honed in on this like in the moment experience that I think Web3 is gonna really put us into. Like it's gonna condition us to understand that like my experiences are here now. They're not going to be remembered, and what Facebook and Instagram, those will remain the platforms where we curate and tailor exactly what we want to be, remembered by.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, actually. Very cool. Well, it is getting to be my bedtime here.
All right.
On the far side of this planet. Yeah, thanks for hanging out, guys. I love doing this. It's always like whenever it's a Wednesday, it's like, oh, I've got a call, and I was like, I got a late call on Wednesday, and I'm like, oh, but it's practicing safe sex, so it's gonna be fun.
It always cheers me up, and it's top of my list to get circles because a lot of the stuff that we're doing on like the facilitation of this is on like having a recurring calendar invite that's publicly accessible, and Circle's about to launch a recurring events function that will allow us to do a lot better with calendar invites, inviting people, like showing what happens, streaming. And then we've got a Mythos feature that's coming in the next few weeks that will also help with that. So
yeah, so next week when we have Pavel, so Pavel is working, he's been a friend of mine for a while, but he's the founder of a nonprofit here in Bratislava that's dedicated to creating more social stability in Central and Eastern Europe. And also has done a lot of work with like crazy paramilitary organizations here, like the equivalent of like the 3%ers or like militiamen and that sort of stuff, like here in Slovakia. But he also has done a lot of work like rebuilding in the Middle East, like post after ISIS leaves. So he's a really interesting guy he's generally kind of a quiet guy, but I think he's going to be fun to have on the conversation. He's going to be an advisor on the Forgiveness Project as well. because he's worked in a lot of post-conflict societies. And he's also leading the World Values Survey in Slovakia and Czech Republic, which is kind of cool, measuring the like religiosity and morality of the entire country. And because we are their analytics partner, we get to put all of our fun questions on there.
That's amazing.
It's cool stuff, guys. Cool
Jam,
stuff.
Go get some sleep, and
See you.
yeah,
Good
see you
night.
soon.
See you.
See y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my god. Let me go this way. We all gotta walk in different directions. That's the Oh no, let me turn all these people off. Cool. Well, that was fun. Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for hanging out with us. You said you're liking the intellectual and intelligent vibes. Well, that's nice. Cool guy vibes. That you believe that. Yeah, you know, it is. It is an echo chamber. And sometimes I do feel as if I am in the center of a mansplaining fest. You know, and that's what keeps me going. Every week we meet here. We do meet in a public space that everyone is welcome to join. So any of y'all on Reddit or on Twitch or YouTube are interested in directly joining these conversations, regardless of what you believe your intelligence level to be, because nothing is necessary, just open mind and conversation. And the more perspectives, the less of an echo chamber it will be. So please, please, please come in, bring your curveballs, bring your crazy ideas. You know, this session is called Premise Line. I'm not on PocoChat. I've kind of realized PocoChat doesn't really enjoy these conversations. So I leave PocoChat for different content. Bitcoin, like we got bits. Come on, come say thank you. Thank you, Premise Land. Thank you for the bits. Thank you for the bits. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not on PocoChat right now. I will be later in the day. Not now. But yeah, we do this every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific. We meet in a two-dimensional virtual world space that's browser-based. Best experience from a Chrome browser, even though Justin was just talking shit about Chrome browser. Please join us. You don't have to turn your video on. If you come from a phone, you will be able to hear and to talk. Your audio feature will work. I don't know exactly what we'll be talking about next week, but we talk about lots of different things. The two main speakers, Justin and Laurent, they are both heavily involved in artificial intelligence and sociology. So they are socioeconomic experts, and they also are computer scientists. So it's a really interesting perspective to hear about their experience and doing this kind of work, working with different government organizations, universities. So today's research is a new project that they have with Cambridge University of creating conflict simulations and proposing different policies. So this is a government work, policies that can be implemented to reduce conflict and to pave a way for forgiveness, or, you know, as Justin mentioned, forgetting, or as I felt a lot more comfortable framing as restoring the culture to rebuild the trust and to, you know, reduce the fragilities in communities so that conflict will become less prevalent. So we talk a lot about these topics, these types of topics. So if you're interested in the intersection of technology and psychology and sociology, please give us a follow. Come back next week. Try to join our live conversation. You are welcome. Everybody is welcome. This is not a freaking echo chamber. I know it feels that way. And that's what keeps me coming back every week, because that is not my background. I am a food scientist turned social entrepreneur. You know, my experience is very different than these guys, but I definitely always feel welcomed to the conversation. I think it's really important, you know, to keep the conversation inclusive and diverse. So please come back. Please help us out. And trolling is always welcome. So feel free to troll. You know, I can hear it. You're trolling. We got one last comment here. We say, Oh, I see. Yeah. Thanks for that comment. Yeah. This software that we use is Topia software. It is it's almost 2 years old, and it's pretty complex. So yeah, they're still working, still working on shipping out updates so that we can, have more accessibility to it. But as of right now, Chrome is the best browser to use. And yeah, it is. I like Chrome, but yeah, for privacy, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I am streaming on YouTube, Premise Land. Yeah, but I'm about to end my stream. I got to get some work done, and I'll be streaming to Pococha later in the day, so maybe I'll see you there, Premise Land. And I'll be back tomorrow, not to Reddit, but to Twitch and YouTube and Facebook with our Tea Talks. We do a weekly casual tea party, also in Topia, but this is in the tea house, topia.io/tea house. So yeah, maybe I'll see you there too, Premise Land. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your week. Happy hump day. And we'll see you next time. Bye, bye. What was that? What was that? Bitcoin, look, Premise Land sent us 10 more bits. He sent us 10 more bits. What are you going to do about those bits? Why don't you say thank you? Why don't you give Premise Land a big fat thank you and say thank you for all the bits, Premise Land. We love you, Premise Land. It's so nice of you to come give me bits because then I get treats. I love my treats. Alright, Premise Land, I hope you have a beautiful day. Actually, we got 3 people here. Let me go check real fast if there's anybody that we can go raid. If I've got any friends online that we can go raid. Raid! Bitcoin, what do you think? You want to go raid? You want to go do a raid? Look at those ears. His ears are just as big as his head. Does that mean that his head is small or his ears are big? I'm not seeing anybody. Premise Land, do you have any friends that are on? Do you have any friends that are on? Oh, now that my face is all big. I might just end the stream. Yeah, let's just end the stream. Alright, y'all. I'll see you next time. Thanks for hanging.